Oh boy, this is going to be a big one. Today, we are going to be talking about the newly released Joola Pro 4. I was lucky enough to get invited to Joola's launch event a few weeks ago and got my hands on this paddle early. But before we jump into these paddles, these videos do take a good amount of time and effort, and it would mean a lot if you could hit the subscribe button to help the growth of my channel. Lastly, quick disclaimer, is that these paddles were provided by Joola, but no review was promised and all thoughts are my own. The only control that Joola had over the making of this video was the release date and the time posted, as we all had to sign NDAs at the event. But now that that's over, we can jump right into some specs. At launch, the Joola Pro 4s are only available in the Perseus shape in a 14 and a 16mm option. The other shapes, including the Magnus, Hyperion, and Scorpius, will be available shortly after. The Perseus shape is an elongated paddle. The surface material is a raw carbon fiber face. The Pro 4s contain a Gen 3 foam-enhanced core. This paddle has some added foam that Joola is calling TFP technology. It's just an added layer of foam near the throat, which helps with additional vibration dampening, and it also helps increase the size of the sweet spot over its predecessor. Joola stated that this is a different material than what is around the perimeter of their paddles, but to the touch, they both feel very similar and squishy. The handle length of the Perseus is 5.5 inches, and I just wanted to note that the 14mm grip is still thinner in circumference than the 16mm paddles, just like it has been found on the previous models. The 14mm swing weight was 116, the twist weight was 6.1, and the static weight was 8 ounces. On the 16mm, the swing weight was 118, with a twist weight of 6.3 and a static weight of 8.2 ounces. The price of this paddle is $280, and no discount codes can be applied at this time. So in the title picture for this video, I said there's nothing like this paddle, and I do truly believe that. However, there are two paddles very similar to the Pro 4, and before you go to the comments as I just contradicted myself, let me clarify that there's just nothing quite like a Joola power paddle. The Pro 4 can be best described as the child of a Mod TA15 and a Gen 3S. Meaning, if you are buying a Pro 4, expect the performance of the 3S with a slightly larger sweet spot and a paddle that feels more like the Mod TA15. Joola basically has taken their last two paddles and just iterated on them to make the Pro 4. The power of these paddles is still great, the spin is very solid, more on this later, and if you like the ease of resets with Gen 3 styled paddles, then the Pro 4 will feel right at home to you. The dwell times on these paddles still comes from Joola's propulsion core, which pockets the ball and shoots it back out, similar to a diving board. The spin on these paddles is very good, but as I mentioned, there was more to this. Joola will be releasing a dual stamp paddle, which meets USAP and UPAA guidelines. They will also later be releasing a Pro 4 that is only UPAA approved. The reasoning is UPAA measures spin differently than USAP, and because of that, the UPAA only paddles will have higher grit and will be the paddles that the pros will use. The main reason is majority of their top signed pros only play the PPA and MLP events, which are sanctioned by the UPAA. This is just going to add confusion to the average consumer and is one of the main issues I see with having two different governing bodies for pickleball. Lastly, I did want to mention that I still prefer the 14mm over the 16mm. The reason being is I feel like the 14mm has just slightly less power and just a little bit more control. And this falls in line with me using the original Gen 3s in a 14mm Magnus shape, and then in the Mod TA15 in a 14mm shape, and then in the Gen 3Ss also in a 14mm shape. Now, pros like Ben Johns use the 16mm, and people like my co-host Graham also use the 16mm and was the same throughout the board of all the previous iterations. I just personally like having just a little bit less power, as I feel like this paddle has plenty, and that little bit extra control really goes a long way for me. The Pro 4s, as I mentioned, are just slightly enhanced Gen 3Ss. With the Mod TA15 being sunset and having a compressed core, I felt the 3S is a better comparison to do. But to summarize, Joola is doubling down on durability and has completely moved away from compressed cores, which was basically just putting a 17mm core into a 16mm mold when in the thermoforming process. They did this practice on the Gen 2s, but it became a much bigger issue on the Gen 3s, leading to their delisting alongside the Mod TA15 being sunset on July 1st of this year. This process left the polymer cores to be slightly core crushed out of the factory, with them fully breaking down later, causing the paddles to get crazy hot. Joola did away with this on the 3S, and that is the main reason the 3S felt so much stiffer than the mod. But now, with the extra foam in the throat, the Pro 4 feels much more like the mod, which I think a lot of players are going to enjoy. The Pro 4 will still have a break-in, but we were told that this is just the foam loosening up and not the core breaking. The 3S and the Pro 4 have almost identical power when I ran my speed test at my local club. My speed test came back around 53.7 miles per hour on the 3S for my 14mm and 53.6 miles per hour on my Pro 4 14mm. The slightly bigger difference I noticed was with spin. The difference wasn't crazy, but the Pro 4s had an average of 70 less RPMs than the 3S. This is likely due to what I mentioned above, that the 3S is a UPAA approved paddle, and the Pro 4s at launch is a dual certified with USAP and UPAA approval. The performance is very similar, and in all honesty, I do not know if the slightly improved sweet spot is worth the upgrade over the original 3S. Joola has made yet another amazing paddle, and I know this is going to do crazy well. The pros excel with it, and even top pros who aren't signed with Joola anymore are switching back to it. Joola seems to be the only brand that can deliver on this specific feel of their style of these foam-enhanced paddles. The Pro 4 is just their next iteration, and it plays amazing. Now, is this a paddle that I would recommend to your average player in rec play? No, it would not be. But is this the paddle that I know the average rec player is going to have the most fun with? Most likely, yes. Power is becoming what majority of pickleball players want, and Joola does it better than everyone else in my opinion. At almost every PPA event you go to, 25 to 40% of the amateur players are using Joola paddles, and there's a reason. Joola makes very solid paddles. Maybe not the most durable paddles in the past, but that's improving. Now, do I think the Pro 4 is worth the upgrade over the 3S? I do not, unless the USAP stamp is something you need for local tournaments. Now, would I recommend the Pro 4 from someone coming from the Mod TA15 that's looking for a replacement? Yes, this is the closest feeling paddle to a mod on the market, but just know this paddle is likely not going to heat up like a broken-in mod. At the end of the day, I'm not saying you need to spend $280 to get a solid pickleball paddle in today's market, but the high price tag aside, the Pro 4 is objectively one of the best paddles on the market, and Joola in 2025 just seems to be doing things right. If you plan on picking up a Pro 4, I would love to hear why down in the comments. If you have any questions for me, I would love to read those down below as well. And lastly, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.